So this is computational archival science. Oh yeah, approaches to community archives. So let me actually make this small so I don't have to see my own face. Um, so over the summer, I volunteered at a my local Buddhist church in San Jose, and they actually um they actually were looking to start some of that digitizing process. So this project is sort of building off of the work I started in the spring, and then just taking what I've learned, in archives, and actually applying to this community archive that I'm already like familiar with. So some background, the San Jose Buddhist Church, Betsuin, is based in San Jose. They have a community archive like committee. It's entirely volunteer run, and all the members are Japanese American elders. So based on some of the history that I learned through the elders, they shared with me that, during Japanese internment, of course, many churches, along with just general Japanese organizations, any sort of cultural hubs, were often met with persecution. And so a lot of the church leaders were kind of put into a position where they felt pressure to burn a lot of documents or burn all the documents that had any Japanese text because they were fearful that any having the presence of Japanese texts would make them seem that they had a more strong connection to their homeland instead of the US, and thus, sort of deeming them as traitorous in the eyes of the state. So, given this background knowledge and given the history, there is like a prominent Japanese American community in San Jose, but they have mostly been pushed out through gentrification. It's really important to preserve these documents. At the moment, their archives room is just like a huge room with like, hundreds of folders and hundreds of binders, and it's entirely paper documents. So I think just thinking about, the climate of California, there's obviously a lot of fires. Climate change is real. So thinking about all those things, it's really important to digitize those materials and having them live in multiple locations. Um, so in terms of some community archive woes, a common problem that plagues, archives and especially community archives is the lack of manpower, and the lack of funding. So like I said, the archive committee is entirely, um, volunteer run. So how are you supposed to digitally backlog over 75 years of documents, with a small budget and with a small part-time team, especially when these church members also have other things they want to work on as well? So I helped them set up a sort of structure for starting the digitization process that just, entailed like literally going in, scanning the newsletters. And then I decided that they could just live on Omeka because that way it's a clean interface. It's you can experience the documents as though it was like a digital collection and have all the metadata populate on the side while also having an image of whatever document you wanted to look at. And also it was low cost. But some of the issues was that extracting the metadata itself was pretty time consuming. I was the only one who was doing this work at the time. So, I would take a newsletter, I would actually have to read through most of it, actually pull out all the metadata manually. And each newsletter averaged about 15 pages, and had like a bunch of different subsections, which meant that I had to, list every organization because that was something that they said that they wanted to. That's the reason why they wanted to have these digital, was they wanted to be able to look back at what specific subcommittees were looking at and to see, what specific contributors, what newsletters they were, a part of. So here's a look at some of the metadata. This is from the Dharma, which is the title of the newsletter, January 2008. So the fields I decided were just based on what was already available on Omeka. So I just followed the structure of Omeka because I had planned to use a plugin to plug the spreadsheets into Omeka. So, it just has title, subject, description, creator, contributors, language, etc. And the key point was that they also were really interested in having a tagging system, so that way you could see which subcommittees belonged, or sorry, which subcommittees reported on which months. Um, so for the most part, this information stayed relatively the same, like because of limitations of, just having one person work on it. I couldn't do item by item description. So I just wrote like a general description of what the newsletter was typically like, and then just had that for the same every month. But then, I'll talk about it a bit more in the later slides. So with the first iteration, like I said, everything was manually extracted, put into a Google Sheet, and then imported into Omeka. Since it was done manually, there were room for human error. Like after looking at hundreds of pages, maybe perhaps I had missed a name or, misspelled somebody's name. So it just was like a lot of work to make sure you had to keep going over stuff to make sure you didn't miss anything. And just to do some like general estimation of like the math of how long it would take or how many pages you have to go through. If I average 15 pages per newsletter, 12 newsletters a year, and then like 70-ish so years of newsletters, which I don't actually know if it goes back that far, but I will say at the very least, there's at least 25 years that I like physically saw. That would just mean thousands and thousands of pages. And that doesn't even include time spent actually having to physically scan the documents, let alone start, parse through the metadata. So for the purpose of this project, I wanted to apply some of my digital curation skills that we learned in this class and some CAS tools that we learned about in order to create a workflow that kind of helps, that includes some like automation processes just to help lessen volunteer workload and help volunteers catalog materials in a more efficient manner. And so given the scope of this project, basically this is a proof of concept. I created a kind of like a potential model practice, keeping in mind the purpose of the archive and also the group's accessibility. Like I said, a lot of the members, actually every member of the archive committee is an elder. So I want to make sure that the information and just the tools are like as simple as possible. That way more people can learn how to use these tools faster. And also there's not like a limiting factor. Like you don't have to like know how to code in order to use these tools. So the first step I would say would be using NLP to do segmentation, which would entail just dividing up this document into sections and then annotating them, just to indicate kind of like where one idea starts and one idea ends. So for example, each subcommittee would have like an update each month. And so that would be like that could potentially be like a segment where here's the beginning of like Songha crafters update, and then here's the end of their update. So, and the possibilities for using an NLP to do segmentation is that you can run inquiries in the future. So, if you were to build it into a more sophisticated, tool where you actually have some sort of search function, I could search, like Songha crafters and then be able to like pull all the items where it's just that section instead of pulling an entire newsletter, because then I would have to parse through 15 pages of a newsletter in order to find that particular section. So a potential tool I found was Layout Parser. It's a Python library of pre-trained deep learning models that's designed to do document segmentation. And since it's already kind of all pre-packaged, like you as a user don't have to actually learn how to use Python, even though I'm sure it's helpful to learn. But so this is just kind of an example. This is just like a mock I made. I actually didn't use the data visual, or I didn't use the layout parser for this. But yeah, so you would just basically like manually draw in like little boxes around the sections you want. So like for this page, this is like the Betsuin board bullets. So I separated it into like each section. So it's like the Dana Club, oh my God, it's so hard for me to see this. The Japanese language school, the budget, the new staff member. So any sort of like break in the document, I would draw a square around it. Next, you could use an OCR tool. So basically that just, creates takes an image and converts it into text. So with each segment that you pull out, you can use OCR to extract the text from the segments. That way, volunteers can more quickly locate the desired metadata instead of actually having to hand transcribe everything. Because, typing it in isn't that bad, but if you have, hundreds of documents to type in, it gets to be quite a lot of transcription. So a potential tool would be Amazon Textract. This is a machine learning service that uses OCR to extract, text, handwriting, and data. Pricing wise, you do get a free 3 months trial, but afterwards, the pricing per page in the Oregon area or just PST zone for the first million pages is less than a single cent. Like, it's very, very affordable in terms of pricing, and you don't actually have to learn how to use that program yourself. I think I did the math, and it was like less than $5 to do all the documents that I like wanted to do. So that's something that's like very doable, where you just sort of batch send stuff over to Amazon. They do all the work, then they just send you the files back. So that's an accessible option. Next would be using AI for item description. So, using AI, you could upload a newsletter and ask the program to kind of give you like a summary where you could just say, I want this in 200 words. Can you summarize this document for me? That way you can have item level description that otherwise most archives wouldn't do, just because of how much work that would be to do item level description. The only drawback is that it would require some editing, because AI is not perfect. You still would need somebody to oversee it. A potential tool would be Ask Your PDF. This is an AI service that just allows you to ask questions to a PDF. It's pretty affordable. It's about $10 a month with 2,500 pages per document and 50 documents per day, which is definitely, like, for a small team, totally fine for people to share. So like I said, I did not actually write, item by item description, but this would allow me potentially to input a unique description for each newsletter, because of course the happenings of each newsletter change month to month. So I did do a test trial. I put in one of the months, I think I put in January 2008. So I didn't actually, you have to kind of limit if you say like, I would like it under 200 words. Otherwise, you'll just get like a really long chunk of text, given it was a 15-page document. So I whittled it down to, I think, about maybe under 300 words. So, here was an example of a condensed summary. And, for the most part, like, I think it was fine, like, for a description. I think you might want to in the future use a more sophisticated tool that you can actually train on your own data set, instead of using like something like Ask Your PDF, which has like an unknown huge data set that you don't know. But I think for the most part, like, with some editing, this description could totally work and would give people an idea of what was in each document. And my conclusion is that since the lack of funding for community archives and for archives in general is a structural issue, I'm not suggesting that like we just automate everything as a way to sort of not have fun, or as a band-aid solution to not having funding. I think it's important to find sustainable funding sources, but there are unfortunately a lot of power imbalances when it comes to who determines what records are important and thus worth funding and thus worthy of being preserved. And so I think using CAS tools can kind of help community archivists and volunteers alleviate some of that that labor imbalance and just the time-consuming elements of their work. And then this kind of gives them more time and more energy. This frees them up to actually have the time and energy to do the people-centered, creative, like, sense-making work, and that curatorial work that, AI, at this point, at least I don't believe, will have the same ethics, and the same framework in terms of like how to actually, preserve this information. So, and I think also incorporating CAS approaches can be a strategic way to open up community archives to a larger pool of grant opportunities, as they would be able to apply to DEI grants, archival related grants, historical grants, as well as computer science related grants to fund their projects. I think, like I said, it's not a band-aid solution. I think it's just another tool of innovation. I don't think it's something that we should use uncritically, because there's also like ethical considerations of, well, what data set is this AI trained on, and also like who were the people who had to actually do all of that, who had to do all that training, right? There's like lots of reports about people in the global south basically in these like data mining centers who are the ones who are doing all this work. So I don't think that it's something that is a perfect solution. I think it's important to think about where this data comes from, who is doing the work to sort through it, so that over in the US, like I'm able to just input something into an AI program and spit an answer back out. It's like somebody's work is the reason why I'm able to do that easily. So yeah, I think those are, this is a good starting point in terms of, in an ideal world, I think it'd be great to actually package this as something where, you could have a little like toolkit, like here's a CAS toolkit that like you could shop around to different community archives and show people how to use. But yeah, thanks.